So, we're going to look at sense contact in this episode. Firstly, a few days since I've done a video, we're back in the season now at the House of Inner Tranquillity, so I'm doing a lot of talking on Wednesday evenings and on retreats and interviews with meditators, so it may very well be that I need a bit of a rest before I then venture into another video, so they might be spread out over a longer period of time. I will try to make them as short as the breaks, as short as possible there. Also, there is a discussion has arisen as to whether I'm actually going backwards through condition-dependent origination or forwards. I'll leave that to you, but we are at link number 6, having done link number 7 last time. Anyway, link number 6 is Paticca, translated as sense impression or sense contact. So what we mean by that all the sense impressions that arise due to there being the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body and mind as being the basis by which, the sense basis by which sensory contact, sensory data, sensory information emerges. So obviously there are visual objects, there is shape and colour, there are sounds, there are tastes, there are touches, there are smells, and including the mind as the 6th sense, we then have mental objects arising, these being memories, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and the like. And it's really important to recognise, and it's really helpful in developing our understanding of conditionality, to recognise that sense contact, sense impression, sense contacts are not things in themselves. They have no intrinsic existence separate from other things. So always with conditionality, when discussing it, we have to use words, we have to use concepts. So the very nature of concepts are to divide experience and delineate experience into separate things, so that we can then talk about those things. So if you consider, I've used the example of a tree recently, but if you perhaps think of the example of a rainbow, the rainbow exists, it doesn't have any fundamental intrinsic existence. It is simply, but it is the result of other conditions coming together. In this case, sunlight and rain in a particular way produces this effect, this rainbow. And it's really helpful to understand sense contacts in the same way, because then we really begin to get a sense of how ephemeral existence actually is. We tend to think it's so concrete because we overlay on top of the sense data, we overlay a conceptual reality. Being conceptual, it is suggestive. Concepts tend to condition the arising of a perception of permanence. So we say car, house, room. Time isn't implied in any of that. It's just a static entity. And so the fact that that entity is a construct made out of an infinite number of tiny conditions of mind and body is not recognized in the concept. So we overlay sense data with a conceptual interpretation, which is absolutely necessary. And this is where it gets a little bit tangly. It is necessary to do that because we have to navigate our way through the world, and so you need an interpretation. You need some kind of narrative. However, through the practice of insight meditation, you come to see through the narratives. You come to see that the narratives are indeed narratives. You come to see that there is a conceptual reality which overlays sensory data. You come to see all of this directly. So, however, So in the same way that a rainbow is not a thing in itself, it is the product of conditions, so sense data is also the product of conditions. It is the coming together of a sense object, a sense base, and sense consciousness. So with the coming together of those three, you have sense contact. So for there to be shape and colour, there has to be the working sensitive matter of the eye, which picks up the raw the raw data and converts that into an image. So it also requires there to be seeing, eye consciousness. And remember, with conditionality, what we're talking about is when this arises, that arises. With the coming into being of this, that comes into being. When this is not, that does not arise. With the ceasing of this, that ceases. So is it the case that you can have sense contact in the absence of shape and colour, if it's the eye? Can you have sense contact in the absence of a working eye? EYE. Can you have sense contact in the absence of seeing, in the absence of eye consciousness? And the answer to that is no, in just the same way that you wouldn't have a rainbow if there were no light. You wouldn't have a rainbow if there were no rain. So suddenly that makes all this sensory data that we experience, it makes it very ephemeral. Or it is seen to be ephemeral. So you need those conditions for the arising of sense contact, and as we know, it's from the arising of sense contact that you then arises feelings and perceptions. And it is in response to the feelings, the sense contacts and the feelings and perceptions, that there is this unwarranted conceit which says, this is happening to me. So it is resultant experience. And that conceit that this is happening to me, I am separate from this and this is happening to me, is the failure to recognize condition-dependent origination. It's the failure to recognize that sense contact is arising on the sense basis and gives rise to feelings and perceptions, and that there is then this response arising. And it's out of course, we know, going back through Paticca Samuppada again, we know that fundamental conceit then gives rise to the volition, action undertaken with a view of self, which then necessitates future resultants. And I thought it would be quite interesting just to go through an example of that in slightly more detail for the second part of this video, taking as a subject victim mentality. So someone believes that they are the victim of some kind of aggression or oppression, some kind of bullying, some kind of activity where they are being put down, they are being boxed in, you know, the kind of thing. So what's going on there? So I talked to my students last Wednesday about the Zen koan, which runs along the line of, there's a chicken in a bottle. How do you get the chicken out of the bottle without harming the chicken or breaking the bottle? And the beautiful thing about this koan is that they actually give you the answer. And the answer is there, it's out. But what wasn't discussed with regard to that koan was, like, how did the chicken get in the bottle in the first place? And it's similar to, well, how does somebody get into this position where they believe that they are they run a narrative habitually that they are the victim of other people's aggression. And the answer is there is simply no first beginning to Paticca Samuppada. There is no point in time at which the chicken enters into the bottle. There is no one source to the Ganges or to the Amazon. There are many different streams which gradually coalesce and converge into a recognizable form, the Amazon or the Ganges. And so I think with all these habitual tendencies that we employ, including the whole problem of victimhood, is that they're emergent over a long period of time. A lot of resultants arising and tendencies being formed over a long period of time. So you can never say there's no first beginning to it. All we know is that in response to the sensory data that we experience as resultants, there are feelings and there are perceptions, and then we respond, and we often respond with a, how could you do that to me? You're bullying me. Why are you bullying me? Stop bullying me. Okay, so how does that work in terms of Paticca Samuppada, given that there's no first beginning? So there arises in experience a result which gives rise to the perception of someone being aggressive to us or somebody trying to assert their will over us. And so that triggers entry into the bottle. It triggers entry into this well worked out story of victimhood. So we enter into that box, and everything that we do now is acting from within that bottle. So our view of the world is being distorted because we're viewing it from within this translucent bottle, this box that we've created for ourselves. It's a storyline, it's a narrative, and it's a narrative we know so well. I am the victim of somebody else's oppressive behaviour. So there is an initial resistance to and a rejection of experience through misinterpreting it. There is then the working up of that narrative and reworking and reinforcing of that narrative, that's clinging attachment. And then there is a sense in which I have to act to defend myself, I have to act to restore balance, I have to act in order to put this person right because they have wronged me. So that means that there now has to be new action. And so the person that considers themselves to be the victim acts in many different ways, but it is a willful act of resistance, defense, asserting one's will on the situation. Now, if we step out of that box for a moment, step out of the bottle, and just go and look at it from the point of view of the other person, how is that act of will on the part of the person who believes that they are the victim and are acting out of that victim mentality, how are they perceived? They are perceived as being aggressive, they are perceived as being willful in trying to assert themselves, to block, to stop any kind of interaction, so that the person who is outside of the bottle isn't actually getting any real interaction with that person, because that person is acting out of their story. So the person outside of the bottle, I hope you're keeping going with this, the person outside of the bottle is exasperated because the person they're talking to is actually being very, very forceful, blocking, parrying, defending, attacking, and there's no real communication going on at all. So they become exasperated with that other person. oh, you're not listening to me, or and so that is the new resultant. So back to the person in the box, in the bottle, the chicken in the bottle. How do they perceive this new resultant? As further evidence of them being victimized. That the other person is being the bully, the other person is being the aggressor. And so, how do they respond? Well, they know this story so well, it's so familiar. I can't let this happen. I can't allow people to tread all over me. I have to defend myself. I have to block. I have to counter. I have to make them pay for their behaviour. And so, can you see, you're just back in this loop again. So there's the reinforcing of the narrative. There's the acting out of that narrative. It's only going to produce future results, which will produce sensory data, which will be perceived in a way that reconfirms the narrative all the time. So then the Zen koan is saying, well, how then do you get the chicken out of the bottle without harming the chicken and without breaking the bottle? And the answer is, there, it's out. What is it that you have to give up? What is it that has to change in order to be out of the bottle? You've got to give up the narrative. You've got to go back and actually examine closely the true nature of sense contacts and the feelings and perceptions that arise. Is it actually the case that these narratives are solid realities? Or is it the case that they are conceptual interpretations of experience and that the underlying experience is actually empty, completely empty of that narrative? That in reality there are no narratives, there is just the arising of sense data, the feelings and perceptions. And don't forget, we need narratives in order to make our way through the world. But if you understand the true nature of sense contacts, if you comprehend that indeed there is no essence to them, that they are entirely ephemeral, then the way that you narrate the story of your life can then be so adaptable and so flexible, and that you are not trapped in any one particular narrative. So you are no longer the victim. You're no longer the aggressor. You're no longer the victim. And so for anyone practicing Buddhist insight meditation or vipassana, you have to become clear about what your narratives are and what your habitual tendencies are. And you have to recognize when they're arising, and you have to voluntarily put them down. So for somebody with the victim mentality, it means going against that habitual grain, and it means learning not to defend yourself, because that act of defense is the imbalance in reality. Because in reality your narrative is just not true. It's empty. So you break the wheel of condition-dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada, by voluntarily handing in your narrative. So if you have the tendency to say, oh, she bullied me, oh, he's oppressing me, it's voluntarily, no one's enforcing this on you, it's voluntarily letting go of those views, letting go of the narrative, because that's the bottle that you hold yourself in. You are the chicken in the bottle, and you free yourself. And the mind that has been freed from all these narratives is without limit. It's not circumscribed at all. Some people say it's like an oceanic mind, but even an ocean is circumscribed. So then you can see so many different points of view because you're not tied to any particular one. So yeah, so I hope that helps begin the process of rounding out Paticca Samuppada. So just remember then that sense impressions, sense contacts are not things in and of themselves, they are the product of conditions. And actually, for practicing Buddhist meditators and practitioners of mindfulness who want an entry point into observing ultimate experience, what I found using sense contact was the most straightforward way. That's a sound, that's shape and colour, that's a smell, that's a taste, that's a touch, that's a mental object, that's a mental object. And you just keep observing how these individual minute moments of sense data arise due to conditions and cease instantly, and that they cannot exist without the existence of these other factors that I've already mentioned. So that is a very direct entry point into proper Vipassana meditation, seeing the transient nature of sense contacts. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. You're very welcome to comment, ask questions down below. See you again soon.